Hi, and welcome to Arrows Rugby. We're a Catholic community with the purpose of forming men in Christian virtue through competitive rugby. My name is Blake Pellerin. I currently serve as the president of the club here. And tonight we are having another Arrows Tale, which is basically our way of sharing stories of the men of this club in their journey to Christ. I'm really excited about tonight's tale that we're going to have tonight, this evening, because these are two guys that have been with us since the very first year of Arrows Rugby. And so that's really exciting. Michael Hart is who will be on the hot seat tonight. Michael currently serves as the club's treasurer and is also on the board of directors here. And interviewing him is Eric Robinson, who no longer lives here in Houston. He's up in Colorado. But Eric has written a couple of books, including one called Thoughts of a Changed Mind, which I'll let him maybe get into a little bit. Well, anyway, we can plug later or whatever. And he's just come out with a book that I got in the mail today called Thoughts of a Sacramental Mind, which I'm super excited to jump into as well. But he's also a host of his own podcast called Polycarp's Paradigm. So just plugging it up for you, Eric. But those are some really great resources that have really helped me enrich my faith and learn about truly just learn so much about my faith. So really excited about that. And it's, I guess that's all I got to open us up. Eric, if you don't mind, I'll just pass to you and let you roll.
Well, sounds good. Thanks, Blake, for all those shameless plugs. And so it's interesting because I had no idea Mike Hart's story until maybe about a year ago when we ran into each other after a Arrows rugby game, and we just started talking, and we both realized that we had grown up Protestant and became Catholic. We were converts to the Catholic Church, and so I wrote actually that first book while I was converting to the Catholic Church, and so I wanted to capture all the changing ideas I had. So that's why I wrote Thoughts of a Changed Mind. And a big influence on me becoming Catholic, of course, and a huge paradigm shift was the sacraments. So that's why I wrote that second book. But I'm excited to talk to Mike Hart here. And, he's actually been playing rugby with the club way more than I am. So thank you for allowing me to participate. But I actually didn't have much of a season that first year. I got injured in the second scrimmage. But then the second year I played 4 games and then got injured and kind of retired since. But anyway, that's a little bit about my career. Mike, share with us a little bit about how you even found Arrows Rugby and how you got started in rugby.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you thinking that my story is interesting anyway, just before we get started. So hopefully it's, it actually proves to be so. But so Arrows Rugby, I found the Arrows through the church bulletin. There was an ad put out and said, interested in playing rugby with a Catholic men's team, no experience required. And of course, being, 35 years old, it sounded like a great idea. So I came out and knew nothing about the game. This is in the club's first year. Well, I take it back. I'd emailed Mike Shadd, the founder, early in the year. I had a lot going on that year. 2016 was a really rough year just personally for my family. And, Mike was saying, well, we practice 2 times a week, come out and we have games on Saturdays, and so I was trying to figure out, well, how much time do I actually have to commit? At that time, I wasn't able to really commit in the fall. Things kind of slowed down a little bit later around the turn of the year. And kind of got interested and said, well, how's this team doing? I wonder if they still need players. And I remember going to the website, pulling up the scores, and they're pretty lopsided. So I thought, maybe I could at least provide a warm body in there if they were injured or whatnot. So that kind of emailed Mike Shadd again and said, sure, come on out. We need people. So that was my introduction, to the club. I think I had all of 2, 3, maybe 4 practices before getting told you're starting in the first game coming up against Bay Area. So it was trial by fire there, but fell in love with the game and really enjoyed it and just kind of really got into it. I think, an equal part of it is not just the game, but it's the men that are involved in the club, getting to know everybody through there, getting to know the mission of the club, as Blake reminded us, the development in Christian virtue is just a huge uplifting, supporting environment, paired with a really fun game, and just kind of got hooked from there.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to dig into your spiritual journey. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we both weren't Catholic and then became Catholic. And so tell us about your religious upbringing. What was that like growing up? And go from there.
Yeah. If I have to think back to it, I think, I was always very fortunate maybe to grow up in a house where, faith life, Christian faith was very important on both sides of my family. I grew up, was baptized and eventually confirmed Lutheran, and, kind of along that way. So my parents divorced, and my dad went back to his religious roots, shortly after the divorce, which was Southern Baptist. He grew up Baptist in the Dallas area. And, he got really involved in his church here, Second Baptist. And so, we always kind of lived, we moved away when I was young and lived in Phoenix and then in Dallas. And so always coming back to visit, went to his church. So I got really kind of a lot of experience through, Sunday worship, and then also church camps, vacation Bible school, whatnot, all the way through on both sides growing up, to get a healthy exposure, I think, to kind of a more, formal Protestant branch of the church or the world, I guess. And then through the Second Baptist side of things, which was, kind of more had less structure, more praise and worship music and, things like that throughout. So I think that was, something that I got a good experience throughout there. Even in my college years, I never really had any pangs of doubt. I was never an armchair atheist or whatever, kind of along the way. I never had any kind of crisis moments where it's like, I don't know if I can believe this story, is Jesus who he says he was, and how's he written, things like that. I never had that, although I will say I probably wasn't the most faithful attendee and Christian all the way through college. I think it was all in all, just very blessed to have that be such an important part that my parents and my grandparents emphasized.
Now, I know a big part of being part of the Baptist church is like having that experience of accepting Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. Did you have that sort of experience growing up?
Yeah, I think so. Through, I remember there was like a group early on. My dad took me to, gosh, I don't know how old I would have been, like maybe 10 or 11 or 12. It was a big, fill the Astrodome type thing called Promise Keepers, and kind of this very,
I went to that.
Yeah. And so it was a cool, weekend. It was good, father-son bonding time. And, it was kind of, there were, kind of the classic altar call moments, in that. And so having that experience, growing up, it did really emphasize that. And even maybe more so than the kind of the Lutheran side, that, the concept, the idea of the personal relationship with Jesus in that way.
And what age were you when you went from Lutheran to Baptist? Or was it?
Well, I never kind of fully. It was always kind of a back and forth route. When I was,
that's right.
I lived with my mom, and so we would, go to church every Sunday, Sunday school, and youth group and whatever through that. And then when I came to visit my dad and stepmom, it was always, on the Baptist side of things.
And did you ever question like, why are these two different, or like what's going on here, or did it just, or which one did you prefer?
Yeah, well, for me personally, and I don't know if it has to do with exposure or whatnot, I was always drawn to the more kind of the traditional liturgical side of things. So that may have been an early seed planted. I liked the formality of things. I liked, always going up for communion. Those were things that even, I think, thinking about it, maybe even my mom kind of stressed just the importance of going up to communion weekly, and having that. It was a stark difference though, because Lutheran church in the South is a different experience than maybe if you're in the upper Midwest. The congregations, I feel like, tend to be a little smaller, a little more staid, maybe a little bit older, versus you go to a place like Second Baptist here, and it's got so many activities, so many ways to get involved, and it's vibrant, and there's They have a gym for you to work out. They had a bowling alley there. They had
Wow.
all these different things that was, just kind of dazzling in that way. So it was a different experience. And even, just the music of having the drums up there on with the big choir and, the guitars and singing. I mean, so that was a difference, I guess, that definitely noticed from very early on.
So when you were in college, which university did you go to?
I went to Texas A&M for undergrad.
Hook 'em Aggies. And okay, so what church did you go to there? What was your religious life like there?
Good question. Didn't go very often. So that's what I mean in college. It kind of it wasn't that I ever doubted it. I just did not place an emphasis on it. I was kind of wrapped up in other things, I guess, at that time, and I could occasionally roll out, to go maybe a couple of times a semester. And so I think I kind of bounced around a little bit. There was a Lutheran church I went to a couple of times, but then also my parents bought a place just north of Bryan, maybe my sophomore year, and they started attending a small church up there that eventually they kind of helped found another non-denominational church kind of in the immediate vicinity. But sometimes I would go up there with them as well.
Gotcha.
To attend, with them.
So you mentioned maybe the liturgical upbringing at the Lutheran church were some seeds planted, but after college, when was it when you first were like, I want to go back to church, or like had a spiritual awakening? And then when was the first time you had any sort of leaning toward the Catholic Church? Those are my two questions.
Yeah. I think definitely after college, getting a job, trying to be a responsible adult, I was still drawn to it and just felt the urge, like I need to get involved. I need to find a church home. I need to get plugged back in. This is something that's important to me, So, I think initially I was living here in Houston and just tried to plug in with a couple of the Lutheran churches, which is what I knew. Attended a couple of those, and it was okay. But the interesting kind of thing that kind of had me thinking about the Catholic Church. So this was maybe 2005 or 2004 when that was happening. When I graduated school, moved to Houston, got a job. In 2000, it was Easter 2000, my senior year of high school. I had a chance to go up to New York for Easter, and so we were there. And I attended Mass, my very first Mass at St. Patrick's on Easter Sunday, which was really neat. It was just kind of a different experience, and so that was my first, experience, I guess, overall, the Catholic Church up close. And St. Patrick's, just a beautiful cathedral there on Fifth Avenue, and it was a lot different, right? So both churches that I kind of grown up in, the Lutheran churches that for whatever reason, they tended to be built in the 70s and were relatively staid, simple, adorning, decorations all the way throughout. But going into St. Patrick's, this probably a 120, 130-year-old church built in a kind of a Gothic style, and everything was just like, wow, this is different. This is beautiful. So I think, for one, that was maybe my first experience. The order of the service, the Mass, was very similar to the liturgy of the Lutheran Church. So I felt comfortable in that way, but it was just this kind of sensory experience. You had the incense, the music, the kind of the pageantry and the beauty of the church. So that was kind of like my very first introduction. So then flash forward a few years later, and I'm finishing school, and I ended up dating a girl who was Catholic. And this was about the time that St. John Paul II passed away. And of course, it's in the news. First Pope in my lifetime facing an election, right? So it's all over the news, and kind of all the media coverage of everything in the day. And I was always a fan of history for just in general, and so that's maybe another thing that kind of put there. But I remember, with the news coverage and everything else, just having conversations with the girl I was dating of just like, what is going on? How do they do this? And then being intrigued by the coverage, because they're kind of giving little anecdotal stories along the way of, here's what they do, look for the smoke, and then talking about like the history of, back in 400 years ago when this Pope was elected, so all these kind of stories, though, that, is just kind of fascinating. So that sparked conversation with the girl I was dating. And we were dating long distance. She lived up in Dallas. So on one of the visits up there, I went to mass with her on Sunday, and, kind of similar experience to what I'd had in 2000. I'm just like, wow, this is very familiar. And I'm just kind of drawn to it, just kind of everything involved, the style of the church. And I can't even remember, where it was. And I can't remember anything specific about that particular mass and why it stood out, but it was just kind of this whole sensory experience. So I think it was initially kind of drawn to beauty. So anyway, come back to Houston. I'm thinking about things, trying to get plugged into a church. And for whatever reason, on whatever night, I decided to probably pull up my laptop and say, what's a Catholic church nearby that I might check out myself, one day, and just kind of go on a Sunday and just see what's about, see where it is. Well, I was living on Sage Road over by the Galleria, and I pull up and there's a church called St. Michael's, also on Sage Road, less than a mile away.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, well, I think maybe I can.
Good name.
Yeah. Seems familiar, seems welcoming. So I went there, and through that, somehow found out about RCA. Had no idea what RCA was, what it stood for, whatever, but somehow I found out about it through there and decided to go on a couple of nights just to kind of check it out. I think it was pitched as something like, are you interested in learning about the Catholic Church or something? Then, stop by and attend. Just drop in, check it out. So I did that for a couple of sessions, maybe a couple of weeks or whatever. And then the girl I was dating, we broke up, so that time for me, it was this kind of question of, well, why am I doing this? Am I doing it to try and, just get in her good graces? If I kept going, would it be kind of in the hopes of like, it's getting back together, whatnot? So I stopped going for maybe a couple of months until I think it was after the new year there in early 2006, where, started new year, new resolutions. And for whatever reason, again, it was just kind of like, what? I'm doing this. I'm going to keep going to this. I'm doing it because I'm genuinely interested. And, I think that was the path for me. There was never really any looking back after that point. It was a good explanation of the faith overall. So I think any uneasiness or questions or whatever I had were satisfied through, a number of those sessions where it was kind of like, yeah, this is the path that I'm on. So that's kind of where I was going. I feel it in a way, it feels kind of in some ways silly, because if I listen to your conversion story on the podcast, Polycarp's Paradigm, and Ethan's on I think it was episode 16 and 17, it was a much more intellectual conversion of this, hand wringing and thinking about, especially Ethan's kind of bouncing through a couple of different branches of the church. Mm-hmm. So in some ways I feel kind of silly just kind of saying I was drawn to the beauty, and then I got some, I feel like I got sufficient answers on some questions, and then Wow. It was kind of like no looking back in some ways. So
see, I love it though. Like everyone's story is unique, and it's funny. Before I started my podcast, I was thinking my conversion story wasn't actually even that great. And I still really don't think it's that great, but but it is great because every story matters, and it's like your friendship with God, and it's like that journey is so beautiful. Yeah. But what were like your biggest questions? Like, what were the biggest hesitations though? I know you said it wasn't much of an intellectual draw, but surely you had some questions that were like, I need these answered.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, if when I think back to it, I think a lot of it was definitely formative of my kind of Lutheran upbringing and coming up through confirmation in the Lutheran Church, and going through the Lutheran Church and confirmation. I feel like a lot of it, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but it certainly was in my case, that a lot of it was more focused specifically on Martin Luther and why it was almost justification for why this, break with 1,500 years of tradition and everything there. So it was more of a Luther apologetics type upbringing. And a lot of that was focused on, I'd say probably two things really was, sola fide and to some degree sola scriptura, more in kind of like the church doesn't want anybody to read it. So this is about liberation and giving people their own power, type thing. So, for me, those were kind of two of maybe more of the bigger hurdles. And I think I actually went through it maybe the other way. So through the scripture side first of, maybe kind of, and I'm not a theologian. I try to read, so I may, I don't know, Father Luke's on here, so forgive me if I misspeak. But kind of the concept of the primacy of Peter, right? The authority given to him, by Jesus to directly found the church. So I kind of maybe came through it initially that way, and it was almost like once I kind of got on board with the authority granted to Peter to found it, and all the sacraments that went along with it, things kind of fell a little more easily, and even the objections to kind of that I found out to the sola fide weren't actually really objections, because we definitely believe that we can't earn salvation in the church. As far as I know, has never taught that. Not to say that there weren't people that didn't strictly adhere to it, or maybe had corrupted the message to some degree. But so that part of it was actually fairly easy, and even kind of knocking down kind of some of the things you'd always heard, the Catholic Church, you can buy your way to heaven, and different things like that you kind of didn't grow up necessarily anti-Catholic, but you'd always hear those things kind of in the background of people saying things even dismissively or offhand or something.
Yeah. So what was it like actually finally becoming Catholic then? Once you overcame these hurdles and you were like, you were about to be confirmed. I guess they had to reconfirm you, right? But your baptism was valid, but then they had to confirm you.
Valid, right?
And then you received the Eucharist. And so what was that like, that experience? And I'm assuming it was Easter Vigil or
Easter Vigil,
okay.
Yeah. Easter Vigil 2006.
And what year was that? 2006? Okay.
Yeah. No, it was amazing. Like, so I was talking to my wife the other night, who's also Catholic. Roundabout story. We're married partly because we're both Catholic, and that was something important to us. I didn't, anyway. So, so we were talking about this the other night, and so, she brought up a good point. Kind of reminded me, kind of, I guess, some things that I'd said over the years was that it's almost like when you're getting married. When you get married, there's this excitement because you're entering into this new relationship, and everything is beautiful and wonderful, and there's all these things that come along that are kind of new and unique, and so you're on a little bit of a emotional high, and you're definitely like in love, and like we're doing this is it, whatever. And then over time, as you have shared experiences together, as you witness and share those good things and the bad things, your love changes, and I think it deepens and broadens, and we've been married, we'll be 10 years this August, but I feel like that's definitely how our marriage has been. But then trying to think about that with the relationship with the church and with Christ, is that it changes a little bit. You don't have the kind of the puppy love anymore, but it's a deeper, more profound. As you learn more about the faith, you learn more about your personal faith with Jesus, and that relationship that you have with him. So it's certainly developed over the years, and I think a huge part of that also for me was attending That Man Is You on weekly for 3 or 4 years, I think, before we had kids and it got a little crazy. But that was just a good way for me to get a real, I think, proper Catholic foundation, and to kind of really, really reconnect with the reasons why I did become Catholic, and to learn more about it and kind of fall more in love with just the beauty of everything that the church has to offer through its history, and the saints and the people that have come before us, the examples that they offer, and a deeper understanding of the sacrament and what they mean. And even that's just been, I think, for me, furthered through this Eros relationship of constantly being challenged by some really, really strong Christians and Catholics within the group, and some really, really sound theological minds that just kind of encourage you. And it's one of the reasons why I have my wife this past Christmas was the Summa. It's there on the bookshelf, and so that's been an amazing thing to try and just grasp overall.
Yeah, it's cool. A lot of you know that I became Catholic 5 years ago, and then 2 years ago both my parents became Catholic. And it was cool. I think it was a few months ago, I was at my parents' house visiting, and I was having breakfast with my dad, and he had read something in some Catholic devotional that morning, or some Catholic Answers book, and he was just like, "Oh, I'm just so glad I'm Catholic." And so it's like, your love kind of just even grows over time as well, and it kind of deepens. And And so for you, I guess you're about 14 years old now in your Catholic Catholic years. You're a teenager, you rebel. So what would you say over the past 14 years has been one of the most helpful devotions to deepen? Because there's so many devotions. Like when I became Catholic, I was like a little overwhelmed. It was like, do I have a devotion to the Sacred Heart, the Immaculate Heart, the Chaste Heart of St. Joseph, Divine Mercy? Like there's so many devotions. So like, what are some devotions that really have helped you nurture your faith over the past 14 years?
I think one of the ones, in particular has been the Rosary. I mean, that's just kind of the whole concept of it is just simple and beautiful. And so I think, that Eucharistic adoration has been another one. I feel like that's been a really, really strong thing. And it's this, again, just drawn to the beauty of being there physically present before Christ and having this alone time and kind of deep reflection time that you can have in the prayer and the silence of trying to listen. That's one of those things that, especially, it's just different. There's nothing that's really a corollary, I think, coming from the Protestant side. Prayer is kind of an act in and of itself, where you're just kind of constantly talking or saying things. And, there at least there wasn't an emphasis in my upbringing anyway, and not to say that it may not be in elsewhere, of just kind of the silence and listening and trying to just be still and be in the presence of, whether it's I guess it may just be the Bible there, but specifically when you have that ability to go before the sacrament and to have that time, it's been pretty powerful.
Wow.
I think in that way, I think adoration specifically led me to one of the last kind of hurdles that I really had as a Protestant becoming Catholic was kind of the concept of devotion to Mary. That was just so foreign and odd. Protestants usually only kind of talk about Mary at Christmas. And even then it's kind of like, okay, that's good. You've done your part. Thank you. See you again next Christmas. So the concept of kind of continuing like dialogue or relationship was new. And the thing that really kind of led me to being open to that whole, relationship was, so in 2016, I think I mentioned it, kind of a rough year. And specifically what that was is we had 2 kids at the time. My son was born in late 2015 and my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer in early 2016. And so it was this, very kind of traumatic experience of, 2 small children, and having breast cancer and going through that and watching her fight and, deal with everything. And so really in those moments of adoration where I was able to go, it was really almost this, I wouldn't call it desperation, but just appeal to Mary. It's like, please, you were a mother, what this is like, and so it was, I feel like that was a bonding experience in that way, or kind of led me down that path to kind of knocking down maybe one of the last barriers that I'd had, from my Protestant upbringing. So, fortunately, going through the numerous surgeries and the chemotherapy and everything of that year, that kind of led me to that. So that is net positive maybe that came out of all that.
And your wife recovered.
Yes. Yeah. 4 years. Everything's looking good so far. So always, keep fingers crossed and prayers going. But so far, so good.
And it's interesting because you kind of hinted at your wife was also a convert to the faith.
No, she was cradle Catholic.
Oh, she was cradle Catholic. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I was going to say, so what are some things as a family? So now you have 3 kids, you said earlier?
Mm-hmm. Oh, 2 kids.
2 kids. So what are some ways that as a family you have fostered devotion and fostered just like instilling your faith into your children? And like, what has that been like in the family dynamics?
Yeah. I mean, we've kind of talked a lot about that and how we see their upbringing and really what we're trying to do anyway, and hopefully we're doing a good job of it, is really to just kind of make it part of the daily fabric of life, trying to make it so that it's not something that's set apart and different. It's like, okay, we go through the work week or, whatever, school week. And then, okay, now we're doing the church thing on Sunday. And that's it. And okay, well, then we go back to everything else. So, trying to make that an integral part. And they're both at Catholic schools, at Sacred Heart schools. And so that was an important thing for us, for one, just to have that be such an integrated part of their daily life, to have prayer, to have mass, to talk about the saints, to have religious education through there, because that takes up kind of the bulk of their day. And so if it's woven throughout, then, all we do is to kind of continue that at home, through prayers, Bible readings. We've got some neat books talking about saints for boys, saints for girls, and trying to make them familiar with those stories, just so that they're, familiar with it. Prayers before bedtime, mass on Sundays, trying to be involved in, various events. I think we've gone to the Vacation Bible School at St. Rose for the last couple of years with them. So, just little things, trying to weave it in and out of kind of the daily pattern, routine, fabric of life.
Wow. And how old are your kids now?
My daughter is 6 and my son is 4. So
awesome.
Yeah.
And okay, so this is kind of my last question. And it's this: what would you say to our Protestant brothers and sisters, or anyone who's not a Catholic? Why check out the Catholic Church? Why potentially explore the Catholic faith? Why not just be content where you're at? Like, why check out the Catholic Church?
Yeah. I think that's a tough one. For me, if I had to kind of just describe that, it would be more just kind of that path of beauty, the design of the church as it was set out and laid out with the sacraments, all these things available to help you on your journey for ultimate, union with God at some point. I don't know. Maybe that's simply how I would describe it. Just kind of the beauty of not only the history, the richness, the tradition of everything, but specifically the sacraments and how they weave in and out of those things. And, that to me is kind of one of the things that stands out, most. I mean, there's just such a rich history with everything, and whatever kind of rabbit hole you want to go down to, there's, years of writings about it. There's, histories, there's family, histories of talking about certain things, of devotions and whatever else. And it's, just something that was different to me, I guess, than kind of even the experiences that I'd had in my upbringing in the various churches.
And it's amazing to me how, like, growing up as a Protestant, for me, my really a distant view of the Catholic Church was that it just seemed like an empty religion.
Yeah.
That, why do you need all those priests and stuff? Like, isn't the veil torn? Like, we can have our own relationship with God. But then when you discover the beauty and the richness of the Catholic Church's teaching, how actually, yes, the veil's torn. And yes, like, Jesus himself comes to you and gives his total self to you in the Eucharist.
Right.
And so it's not only is the veil torn, but your intimacy with Jesus can skyrocket through the partaking of the sacraments, through encountering Jesus through the sacraments. And so I love how God meets us right where we're at in every stage of our life through the sacraments. That's a beautiful thing.
Even I mean, to kind of that exact point, kind of with kind of the idea of, well, I can go to God in and of itself. And so, always grew up with the idea of, well, I can just ask for forgiveness for whatever it is, and God will forgive me if I'm truly, contrite and whatnot. But to have the sacrament of confession, something where you physically go before somebody acting in persona Christi and actually have to vocalize and say these things, and then to hear, the priest say, your sins are forgiven at the end of that. I mean, it's every time it's an emotional experience for me, and it's that's kind of hard to describe to somebody else, my Protestant family members, even, of like what exactly that's like, sitting before, in their eyes, just some guy, and you're telling them all the bad things that you did. How can that be a good idea? But it's truly powerful, and it's just a different feeling than anything that I'd even received kind of in the numerous, praise and worship services and everything else that I had exposure to, whatnot, growing up. It was just such a powerful experience, that in and of itself, in addition to the fact that you are able to go before the Eucharist, daily if you care to. So.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for sharing your story, man. I really, really appreciate that. And like I said before, like every person's story is unique and beautiful in its own way. And so I think you have an amazing journey, and I thank you for sharing that today.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. It's been good. Hopefully, hopefully helpful.
Yeah, well, we'll kick it over to Andy, Mike, or Blake, whichever one of y'all wants to take the reins here.
We'll all fight for it. A good and holy battle, of course. I might kick off. Well, does anybody need a refill or anything? Don't want people to go parched here. Typically we get the luxury of the Knights of Columbus bar at this moment in the agenda or the program. So if anybody does need something, feel free to grab it. But Mike, hey, I just the part about really appealing to Mary with Anne's breast cancer, that kind of struck me a bit. And it sounded like almost just like kind of maybe not the word begging, but you sound like very like, asking her, relying upon her. Can you just maybe walk through a little bit more of like what that was like at that time, and maybe the fruit that Mary's bore since then in your life?
Yeah. I think that in particular, in that moment, in that instance of, appealing to someone who in their complete humanity and had the distinct, specific human experience of being a mother to a child. And a lot of that was prayers of, please help us, please help her. The kids, they need their mother growing up. Like she has to be a part of that. I can't do what she does and can do. So it was really just kind of leaning in and turning to that relationship in a very specific manner in that case, in a very specific instance. And so, I mean, who's to say what one way or the other, but I don't know if I would have kind of maybe gotten there elsewhere, just because it was such a, unique, powerful experience and thing going on at that particular time. But, I think even throughout, through the rosary, that devotion there and occasionally just, spending some time there, kind of asking for prayers of intercessions, particularly and I feel like maybe I tend to do it more into those like very specific, maybe parental or human type experiences, more so as the I don't know, general concerns, joys, or whatnot.
Yeah, no, I think it's the beauty of the Catholic faith to me in a lot of ways is just how real and practical it is. Of course, our Lord manifested himself as a human, so it would only make sense that our faith too is meant to serve us here in the human realm. And yeah, just such a treasure I think we have in the church with Mary. So that was really cool to hear that story from y'all of really depending on her and her motherly aid, and particularly to help the mother, the mother of your children.
Yeah, and I'll say the other thing that was kind of unique, just through the process of becoming parents. I said my first novena for the first time when we also had a difficult time getting pregnant, and it was we as a couple said it was my first novena to Saint Gerard, and also for intercession from Saint Philomena and Saint Anne. So that was another very specific kind of experience of turning to the saints in prayer, of saying, we need some assistance, please, help us.
Yep. Yeah, that's really neat.
Wow. Was that, but you did the novena before you found out you were pregnant, or before your wife found out she was pregnant?
Yeah, we had gone through a couple of years kind of trying and not succeeding. And, we were also actively pursuing she was seeing a doctor, and she ended up having surgery to try and, sort things out. But it was in that process of doing that we were, seeking treatment. But then it was kind of like, well, let's try the novena. I think somebody on her mom's side had maybe recommended that, saying, well, have you tried that? Or said, no, we haven't done that one. So let's do that.
That's awesome.
So, Mike, how did you get kind of devotion to the rosary? Yeah, I'm just curious how that developed for you.
Yeah. I think, again, that was also something that was, just generally kind of foreign to me. And, when you're coming in, especially if you're not coming in with a particular, maybe shepherd into the faith, you're just kind of bumping your way into it. You just kind of discover things as you discover them, which is kind of, I felt like how I was in that process. I didn't have a particular kind of, Sherpa in a way to get through the onboarding on the faith. It was RCIA, and then it was kind of like, all right, you're here, good. And then it was kind of like, okay, well, good. So the rosary is one of those things, just, it's talked about frequently, and, you're aware that it's the function within the church, but until it's really kind of maybe specifically explained or someone talks about their experience with it, I think it's a little more off. So I think really kind of that was more from the That Man Is You experience, and maybe even specifically from the small groups that we were in of talking about that, and various people talking about, their experience with the rosary and doing it. So then it's like, okay, and then it's discovery of, wow, people do this daily. Okay. Wow. I can definitely, step up the frequency with which I'm doing something for sure. So then, trying to follow that on, and one Lent, I that was my kind of one specific add-on, was I was trying to do that one rosary every day for Lent, and this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, and that was a huge thing, and they were kind of carving out that time, more the discipline to carve out that time and to make time for it. Yeah, it's a beautiful prayer. Have lost a couple of prayer books, the rosary books, along the way, and acquire new ones and try and make it work.
That's great. I think Brett's got. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, I was going to say, Michael, two questions from what you were going through earlier. One was, you talked about kind of through high school, it seemed, or maybe even younger than that, but high school and then college, and then after, kind of coming and going. And you had the two different church experiences with your parents, and then stuff that you came across in different places. And it seemed like there was a lot of maybe back and forth in your kind of approaching towards your faith, and then kind of distracted maybe, or coming away. And then when you had that experience, at St. Patrick's, and then finding St. Michael's, did you feel a different draw, something that kept you in the lane, so to speak? And
no, and it's, I think it's, there's definitely kind of a more fluid concept. I feel like just within the Protestant churches growing up of, and I knew numerous people that were like this. I go to the Episcopal church this week, and then, this other week I go to the Methodist church, and then I go to the Baptist one this other time. So in a lot of ways, there's I feel like, and maybe it's just my age or whatever, but there's a lot less attention paid to the specific doctrine and the nuances between the versions of the faith that are out there, and different things like that. I mean, I've had numerous friends that are even like, well, I moved to this town and I go to the Episcopal church, but when we moved to this other town, I found a Presbyterian church, which I really liked, but there's a really good Baptist church if I go to this other town. So I felt like there was a lot more hopping around. So for me, necessarily, like, having the experience of attending a Lutheran church, then going to a Baptist, it was kind of just seemed like kind of what people do throughout. And it was more kind of like, well, it's kind of whatever appeals to you. What service do you like? A more formal one? Do you like the informal one? Because even within certain churches, they'll have the super stripped down, guitar and a drummer type service in the evenings or something. And then Sunday mornings is definitely a lot more formal. And so in that way, it just kind of felt like hopping around, and it was more just generically about a very generic relationship with Christ in a certain way of, let's ignore all the doctrinal differences, and it's just kind of like, we're all generally saying the same things.
Yeah, I think because I'm converting from Methodism, which we've spoken about before.
Yeah.
I was wondering if what you kind of saw in it was the fact that with the Catholic faith, there's somewhat of there's structure there, I guess you'd say, 2,000 years worth of practicing your faith, as opposed to just experiencing or being preached to. There's really practicing with the sacraments, with the devotions, with the.
Yeah, I think there's some fairness to that, and I think that's something that probably drew me in as well. In that it wasn't a form of entertainment to be consumed. I don't go there on Sunday to kind of be entertained up on stage by somebody and to hear a rousing speech, but it does draw you in more, and it is more experiential in that way of, I feel like almost something's required of you other than just sitting back and listening. You're actively participating, even through the physical movements of, up, down, kneel, go to the altar, come back, things like that. There's just much more participation, and I feel like you're actively participating in a very bodily form, this kind of worship.
Yeah. Well, and to that practice and that process, also another thing that you said that really stood out to me, you talked about when you were doing adoration during Anne's illness, that adoration, and then I guess it was your devotion with St. Mary, that you mentioned it was a last obstacle or a last barrier from your Protestant background. And I thought that was really interesting because it's there's never really like short of when we die, there's never really this bright line moment. There's it feels like there's a constant progress, at least to me. Like I'm constantly trying to form myself better, and I know my failings. So you have anything about that?
Yeah, and I agree with you that everything is about it's a continuum, right? Of learning more, understanding more, growing more in your faith, and learning how to better apply different thoughts, and even regular attendance, right, of the sacraments, regular attendance for confession, and actively and regularly praying the rosary or whatnot. So there is that, but at the same time, that was maybe one of the more significant intellectual barriers, I guess, in a way, if you want to call it that, where you're kind of on board, and you're like, I don't know about that one, it's like that's just a little too different, for me, and I don't know if I can get there, so I think that was more of like one of the last maybe intellectual barriers to kind of drop in that way, to where feel like you're almost then fully on board with the wholeness of what the church teaches and offers and espouses.
Well, I think, because what I think is an important lesson in that is that it's not like all those feelings like that you had there are washed away at confirmation, or that if they weren't, that you should feel that, well, it didn't take, I need to look elsewhere. It is a process of growing. Yeah,
because I mean, if I look at the time sequence of there, that was about 10 years, right? Like, it was 2006 when I was brought in, and that was 2016. So yeah, that wasn't something that just automatically, overnight, it was just like a light bulb going on. It was like something you definitely had to grow into and have a very specific experience to get me there specifically.
Coach Andy would say something about your speed at this moment and, getting places, but yeah. Thank you.
So I just got to jump in to say that you dotted down a few perfectly completed tries at the wing position this year. So,
Goran, I'm contributing.
Well, Michael or Andy, do y'all want to wrap this part up, or do we want to see if Eric and Michael have some last thoughts, or what do y'all think?
Are there any questions on the commentary thing, or?
I think we got them all.
Okay.
Or just open it up, or?
Yeah, we can wrap this part up, and then I think Muma, you were gonna maybe chat through just some things for the summer and fitness and fun. So, but yeah, let's close out this part, and we can segue that.
Sounds good. Well, let's end this part with a prayer, and then we'll go into our announcements after that. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Dear God, thank you for this opportunity to still gather remotely to learn about Mike Hart's story. Please guide him on his journey. Please guide all of us to grow in deeper love and knowledge of you. And we offer this up and ask for the intercession of our Blessed Mother Mary as we pray together. Hail Mary.
Full of grace.
The Lord is with thee.
Blessed art thou among women,
And blessed
is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy
Mary,
Mother
of God,
pray
pray
for
for
us
us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Saint Sebastian.
Pray for us.
Pray for us.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and I know Andy needs to drop off, so I'll take it from here. And I'm having some camera issues, so I'm sorry, but Brett,
It's a great smile there, Michael. Though I mean, it's a great smile on your profile